Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, the industry takes the wrong kind of hit this week when DEA Judge John Mulrooney cancels future hearings on rescheduling cannabis off Schedule 1 of the CSA. Now all hope for reform in 2025 is in the new administration's hands as the transition to a Republican control of Congress is complete. Plus, an Ohio mom goes viral when she gets a bonus at a Burger King drive-thru.
Do you see that? You can't say that on here. Mary Jane.
Yes, that employee was fired on the spot, and the Burger King chain confirms his termination and condones the incident. And High Times CEO Adam Levin pleads guilty to securities fraud after a scam he orchestrated scam money from investors 4 years ago. Plus, at first you don't succeed, try again, right? Florida cannabis advocates start the process for another adult use ballot initiative for 2026. They'll face another uphill battle for a 60% approval to change that state's constitution. And a THC overdose in Washington state puts a new user in the hospital, and now he's suing the dispensary. Plus, an update on the California wildfires from the author of the Cannabis newsletter, Jackey Bryant in San Diego. All that and state reports from coast to coast on Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto. Next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, PCMTV's production of the news from the cannabis industry from coast to coast. I'm Alaina Pinto. Another reminder that the easiest way to get access to this show is by downloading the app PCM Space TV on the App Store or Google Play. Just scan the QR code and it will take you there. But remember to add a space between PCM and TV in your search for the app to pop right up. Our top story this week is a continuation of the DEA's process to reschedule cannabis off Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. This time, Judge John Mulrooney put a hard stop on future hearings, blaming the DEA for delaying tactics and handpicked expert testimony from a majority of prohibitionists. Mulrooney postponed any future hearings for at least 3 months and is expecting the new administration to make changes at the top of that federal agency. In his decision, Mulrooney said this about the favoritism exhibited by the head of the DEA, Ann Milgram, saying, quote, "If true, viewed in the best light, these allegations demonstrate a puzzling and grotesque lack of understanding and poor judgment from high-level officials at a major federal agency with a wealth of prior experience with the Administrative Procedures Act." Mulrooney also added that the DEA's refusal to comply with orders was, quote, "unprecedented and astonishing." Plus, the DEA's behavior through this whole process was, again, quote, "a disturbing and embarrassing revelation." The industry had hoped these hearings would have been completed by the time the new administration takes over Congress, but the DEA's delaying tactics and less than fair handpicking of expert testimony accomplished nothing, basically thwarting outgoing President Biden's hope that this could have been done before he left office. And now, with Inauguration Day here, there's a new chief in charge in the White House, Donald Trump. With more from Washington, D.C., here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a significant development for federal cannabis policy, Administrative Law Judge John Mulrooney has suspended the highly anticipated cannabis rescheduling hearings that were set to begin next week. The decision comes after allegations of improper conduct between the DEA officials and anti-rescheduling witnesses. Pro-rescheduling advocates claim the DEA conspired with witnesses opposing this schedule change, leading to what they call irrevocable tainting of the process. The allegations were serious enough that some parties sought to remove the DEA from the proceedings entirely. The case, which could potentially move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act, now rests with DEA Administrator Ann Milgram. If approved, the rescheduling would allow licensed cannabis businesses to take federal tax deductions and ease certain research restrictions. The DEA has faced mounting criticism throughout this process, with Judge Mulrooney himself describing their handling of evidence submission as unprecedented and astonishing. The agency has struggled with managing public comments and issuing proper subpoenas to DEA officials. Multiple stakeholders, including health professionals and veteran groups, have raised concerns about the exclusion from the proceedings. The Justice Department has requested a pause on regulated federal litigation until these procedural issues are resolved. While the delay creates uncertainty for the rescheduling timeline, Judge Mulrooney suggests that the appeal could prevent extensive delays in the future. The court has mandated quarterly updates on the appeal status, with participants having 15 days to file their appeals. Well, that's the DC report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There is some hope for the 119th Congress that is now controlled by the Republican Party. U.S. Representative Dina Titus from Nevada is going to try again to get momentum for federal reform. Of course, industry advocates have heard this before. It's why we call one step forward, two steps backward cannabis standard time. And nothing ever seems to move the needle towards rescheduling, smart banking reform, and research, or social justice. And that is what the current Congress has on its plate. And while Titus is ready to prioritize these changes, lobbyists have been hearing the same thing for years, even dating back to the first Trump presidency. Aaron Smith is the executive director of the NCIA, and PCMTV founder Jimmy Young talked with him this week about the merger of two major lobbyist groups in DC. The U.S. Cannabis Council and the National Cannabis Roundtable. Here's Jimmy and Aaron.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to a very special edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, one-on-one. I'm PCMTV founder Jimmy Young, and I'm so proud to be joined by the executive director of the National Cannabis Industry Association. His name is Aaron Smith. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us once again to talk about what the heck is going on with this crazy industry.
It's always great to be here, man.
Hey, so it's a crazy week. You open up the news on Monday, and the next thing you know is Judge John Mulrooney decides, you know what? DEA's been screwing with this process for a long time. We're going to cancel these next set of hearings, and all the people that were invited are going to have to be postponed. And he says, we'll wait for the new administration. And I also thought he took some pretty fierce targeted shots at Ann Milgram, the head of the DEA, didn't he?
Yeah, indeed. And, this, I'll just say from the start, this is not a strategy that NCIA was behind or happy about by any means, but are some folks who were also on the cannabis rescheduling side of the argument did, uncovered some not too surprising information about how the DEA had been biased through the process, and felt that it was advantageous to order this appeal and thereby delay the proceedings. And so the way this works now is we're kind of in uncharted territory. We don't know exactly how long. We've got the way that it looks as though is that every 90 days that the DEA administrator needs to check in with the court and what the progress is of this, but there's no actual order of when hearings resume. So it's an unfortunate development for sure.
Yeah, and it's a setback. Let's face it, if you look at it that way. Uncharted territory is a great way to describe the incoming administration in Washington, D.C. A Republican-controlled three branches of government at this point, because he did make some appointments that are still sitting on the Supreme Court. That, of course, would be the president-elect. And actually, by the time this interview airs, he will be the president inaugurated, Donald Trump. And we all have our own political feelings about it. But at this point, we have no way to change the result. So accepting the result and working within the framework of this Republican control is going to be an interesting new challenge for all lobbyists, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And on the back to the rescheduling front, we don't know who the DEA administrator will be. It hasn't been appointed yet. We know Pam Bondi is likely to be the attorney general there who oversees the DEA. But the concern that we have is that the way that this process works is that, yes, DEA had been, biased, but this is the DEA's administrative court. This isn't like an independent court, like a district court or, the appellate court. So the judge is in no way able to remove the DEA from the proceedings because the DEA, they're in the driver's seat. So what they've done is they've said, well, let's appeal the ruling that the DEA can't be removed, but they're appealing it to the DEA. So now, and the judge has decided, well, let's wait until the next DEA administrator is here. I think that probably the people, and also Village Farms and Hemp for Victory, which is backed by pretty much, a lot of the common names that you hear out there, the bigger MSOs, these people sometimes they tend to think that the smartest people in the room when it comes to public advocacy and policy, just because they're good at business or, because they're lucky at business, however you want to look at it. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because now we're in a situation where we have a new unknown incoming administrator who would need to make this a priority to get things started in the first 100 days. As in the past, before this ruling, the new administrator would have to have made it a priority to roll things back. So now doing nothing on their part will stifle progress. As in the past, they would have had to really take an action because we would have already had a head start with the hearing. The first couple of hearings would have happened already before they came in. So we're looking at every potential way to try to get things back on track, but it's going to be a tough road.
The entirety of that interview is available on our PCMTV app and on the homepage of procannabismedia.com. In this past election, Florida voters had a chance to pass a constitutional amendment opening the market to all adults over the age of 21. Just under 57% of voters there did say yes to that question, including incoming President-elect Donald Trump, or at least he said he would. Now, the same people who drove that campaign, Smart and Save Florida, are starting their efforts for the next federal election in 2026. Over $100 million was spent on advertising for both sides of this initiative. Certainly, commercial media outlets in the Sunshine State are celebrating if that question garners as much attention and funding as the last one. Well, now let's start our state reports with Pam Chmiel in New York.
This is Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Chmiel reporting from New York. Last week, the New York State Supreme Court ruled that the New York City Sheriff's Office and Office of Cannabis Management must stop conducting raids without a warrant on unlicensed cannabis storefronts. And to further complicate things, the New York City Sheriff's Office has admitted to disposing of evidence they've confiscated from these raids. And the Office of Cannabis Management has neglected to test these products to confirm they contain marijuana and not hemp, which is legal under federal law. Then there is the question of the missing money that has been confiscated from these raids and is yet to be resolved. While most people want these illegal storefronts shut down, there is an outcry over the need for due process in our legal system to avoid a war on drugs like we've experienced in the past. And a group of social equity dispensary owners who were recipients of New York State's now failed loan program is suing the state for loan forgiveness. You may remember that the Chicago Atlantic Investment Group had promised to fund these social equity business owners, but the loans came with a high interest rate and inflated licensing fees for their dispensaries. The New York partnership with the Chicago Atlantic Group began to dissolve after accusations of gross mismanagement by high-profile fund managers like basketball star Chris Webber, and why they were allowed to pay themselves over $2 million in fund fees. Lastly, New York activists are lobbying for Cannabis Health Coverage Act in the state capitol on March 11th. This would require state-funded health insurance entities to cover medical cannabis. That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Chmiel reporting from New York.
Minnesota continues to struggle to get their new adult use market up and running, and advocates and pro-cannabis legislators had targeted this year of 2025 as the year for launch. Now lawmakers in that state have pushed that back until 2026, as all the news, rules, and regulations have to be written from scratch. Right now, the only legal way to buy cannabis in Minnesota is on tribal lands. Meanwhile, in Virginia, another adult use bill has been introduced in that state's legislature. You might remember that state passed an adult use legal bill last year only to see their governor, Glenn Youngkin, veto it. Sure enough, in his State of the Address this week, the governor there said he would veto it again if it passed the legislature. Here's our man in Virginia, Joe Parsons, with more.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection, and this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In 2021, Virginia was leading the way in the fight against prohibition as the first southern state to adopt not only a medical cannabis use program, but the first to legalize recreational use by adults 21 and over. Adult use sales were set to begin by 2024, but ever since Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin took office in 2022, he's been a staunch opponent to adult use and has been doing everything in his power to prevent implementing the retail market, a market that was the will of the people of the Commonwealth since 2021. Last year, he was quick to veto not only the adult use retail bill, but any other cannabis-related bill, no matter how important it was to both people with cannabis-only convictions, but also parents that could potentially lose custody or visitation rights due to use of a statewide legal substance. He even went on record with off-color jokes like, anyone who thinks I'm signing that bill must be smoking something. Delegate Paul Krzik and Senator Aaron Rouse, the two key Democrats that got last year's bill passed on both Senate and House chambers with bipartisan support, are not wasting any time to put a new bill for the 2025 session. They have decided to make only minor adjustments to the new bill, as last year's bill was well received by both parties. Delegate Krzik and Senator Rouse know how important this bill is, not only to ensure a safe and fair marketplace, but to have tested, taxable products that could in turn help decrease the increasing legacy pop-up market that is exploding in Virginia due to the lack of that adult market. Governor Youngkin, in his speech at the State of the Commonwealth address, reiterated a similar message from his veto message last spring, a message we all in the industry expected. He said, "Everyone knows where I stand on establishing a retail marijuana market, encouraging instead to focus on other issues we can find common ground on." This stance is a slight surprise in lieu of the newly elected President Donald Trump's new revised position on cannabis policy, including implementing adult use in other states, such as Florida. However, Youngkin stuck to his usual playbook by repeating his message from last year. He alleges that jurisdictions with a regulated adult use market have experienced significant negative impacts on mental health and adolescent safety. In his veto statement last year, he quoted surveys and research documents that were literally years out of date and used excuses that prohibitionists have been using to invoke fear for years. The fact is that federally funded survey data reports that teens' use of marijuana is at historically lows, especially in states with adult use laws. Studies from both the U.S. and Canada have also failed to identify a relationship between marijuana legalization and increased instances of psychiatric illness among either high-risk individuals and the general public. Virginia NORML Director J.M. Pedini has pushed back on these claims and said what's actually bad for the youth is leaving the control of Virginia's marijuana market to illicit operators. While Paul Krzik and Aaron Rouse know that Youngkin will probably veto another bill once it's passed on the floor, they also know that a safe and fair marketplace is worth the effort. And while Youngkin is not able to run for a consecutive term for governor, it will set precedent to the next governor that this is an issue that we will continue to fight for and that we will not give up on. I, for one, will be following this every step of the way. So stay tuned to Pro Cannabis Media for all the latest to this story as it develops. Well, that's going to do it for this week. From the Virginia Cannabis Connection and reporting from Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
That'll do it for the A block or first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news, but we have many more state reports coming up next, including the story of the Ohio mom who went through a Burger King drive-thru and got a bonus she was not expecting. The news continues after this.
If you look down in there, you can see some residue. She got her chicken fries. Chicken fries with the side of... Do you see that? You can't say that on here. Mary Jane.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.
Welcome back to the B block or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast news. I'm Alaina Pinto. We start with that disturbing experience for an Ohio mother who was driving through a Burger King for a typical lunch order, but she didn't expect the bonus she found in the bottom of the bag. And her TikTok video has been seen now by hundreds of thousands of viewers.
Okay, went to Burger King tonight. Listen, I need you guys to listen. Got my kids some chicken fries. This bag came. If you look down in there, you can see some residue. She got her chicken fries. Chicken fries with the side of... Do you see that? You can't say that on here. Mary Jane. From Burger King in Hamilton, Ohio.
That employee was fired on the spot, and Burger King has not issued a formal statement yet. It kind of takes their slogan, make it your way, to a whole new other level. With more from the state of Ohio, here's Christina Brisson, now sponsored by Yellow Labs, available in 40 dispensaries in that state.
In Willow Creek, Rory, renowned for birdwatching, embraced nature's elegance. Preparing for his woodland sojourn, he used grape-focused THC mist from Yellow Labs. Each spritz honed his senses, capturing avian beauty. Immersed in the forest symphony, Rory's lens froze vibrant moments. Emerging at twilight, gratitude filled him for the mist's clarity. Recalling, find Yellow Labs near you. Rory ordered more of his mist from...
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your Ohio Weekly Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First, I want to talk about different cannabinoids. THCA, Delta 8, and Delta 9 are all ones we're familiar with, but today I recently learned about THCV and THCP. THCV is supposed to be curb appetiting and energy boosting, and THCP is supposed to be 30 times powerful more than Delta 9. We'll see where that goes from here. Also soon to come, DoorDash is going to be delivering hemp-derived CBD and THC products to your door, at least here in Ohio. Don't have a lot of details on it yet, but it's coming soon. We're also opening a new dispensary in Zanesville, Ohio on Maple Avenue. It's True Leaf. Looking forward to that happening as well. And then back to the political world with the Ohio GOP and Mark Huffman, who I've talked about multiple times in the last couple weeks, is actually backing down from some of the restrictions he's requesting on these new rules he wants to have for the state of Ohio. I mean, $242 million in sales last year, which is $24.2 million in taxes to get Ohio programs this year. I don't think there's a lot to complain about. That's your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report, and I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations in Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Ohio Cannabis Report is supported by Yellow Labs and BetterWaysToTHC.com. Search for Yellow Labs near me and find one of 40 dispensaries in Ohio carrying these amazing mists and creams.
At least the Ohio market there has expanded from medical to adult use in the past year and is continuing to grow. But there are still plenty of states trying to figure out how the hemp industry and the medical marijuana programs can survive in the same state. Case in point is Texas, where the Wild Wild West continues to be the mantra in the Lone Star State. Adult use cannabis is still legal in that state, and at least a half dozen cities and towns have overturned their possession laws at the ballot box, despite state leaders like their attorney general who tried to fight the ballot results. If you are in Texas and want to get high, you know that you can get intoxicating hemp products in one of the 7,000 dispensaries that carry them. That hemp product is derived from Delta 8, despite being under the 0.3% limit, where some of the cannabinoids kick in to boost that amount when lit up. So now you have a vibrant multi-million-dollar industry that is unregulated and selling to underage kids. All this is going on while legitimate medical marijuana growers and dispensaries are struggling to stay in business. That group of businesses are abiding by the rules and regulations set up by the state, and now the hot hemp industry is dominating the market. Their governor now wants to ban the entire hemp industry, which would really hurt Texans who are relying on these products for enjoyment and medicinal purposes, not to mention the millions of revenue it is generating. It's a mess, all because of the loophole in the Farm Bill of 2018 that basically legalized the cannabis sativa plant, even though it was trying to control it, not recognizing human behavior and the fact that this illegal consumption of this product has been going on for decades. Lawmakers at the federal and state level had no idea that people would figure out ways to use it and get high. Now, Texas has a complete mess on their hands, since the whole point of the legalization movement is to control, test, and regulate the product. Undoing this mess will be the next challenge in the fight to end cannabis prohibition. No such issue in Arizona, but even legal adult U.S. states do have their issues. Here's Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Do you remember that story about diamond shrooms last summer? Well, let me remind you. Their mushroom-infused edibles made 180 people sick, 13 of whom were in Arizona. 73 people wound up in the hospital, and 3 deaths are associated with the brand. Well, I've got an update to that story, and it's a doozy. The FDA finally got around to testing the polluted products, and there weren't just mushrooms. They contained a whole cocktail of substances, including DPT, which is a synthetic hallucinogen similar to DMT. They also found psilocin and acetylpsilocin, which are illegal in Arizona, and even pregabalin, which is a prescription drug. The diamond shrooms debacle just goes to show how important it is to know what's really in our products. And I've got more bad news. As I've been reporting, Arizona's cannabis market is in a slump, and the latest numbers from the Department of Revenue bear that out. November was a bit of a buzzkill, with adult use sales hitting just $73.1 million, the lowest monthly total of 2024. Medical sales are also on a downward spiral, bottoming out at $16.5 million, the lowest monthly medical total since adult use sales began. Now for some good news. The University of Arizona has officially launched its non-credit cannabis education program, which is in partnership with California's Green Flower, and it's open to the public. U of A now offers 3 6-month online certificate courses covering cannabis business, medical applications, and compliance. This is a significant step forward in addressing the growing needs of the state's 22,000-person-strong cannabis workforce. Meanwhile, Hana Dispensaries in Green Valley is hosting a free coffee and cannabis educational event every Wednesday morning. These interactive sessions offer a casual environment for consumers to learn about cannabis. Lastly, Tempe-based Sonoran Roots has expanded its presence in Arizona. The company celebrated the grand opening of its 5th Ponderosa dispensary on Saturday, this one in Tucson. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Here are a few state headlines this week. In Arkansas, after that state's reform initiative did not pass at the ballot box, the governor there, Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders, announced her State of the State address that she plans to use tax revenue driven by that state's fledgling medical program to fund free meals in Arkansas schools. Next up, let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada and with the tribal nations.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As I report on the Las Vegas consumption lounges often, since, after all, we are the entertainment capital of the world, well, now all the eyes are on San Diego, National City, and the first cannabis consumption lounge set to open early February. This is a joint venture between Alex Ayan and the Sequan Tribal Nation, and the property is on sovereign land. Sessions by the Bay, Lounge, and Dispensary will not only offer the classics in pre-rolls and canna mocktails, they are serving up gourmet food for those cravings. More to follow after the grand launch, and job openings are posted. Dina Titus prioritizes cannabis banking, veterans, and research in Congress. As the new co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, Representative Dina Titus, Democrat Nevada, is laser focused on advancing federal cannabis reforms. Her top priorities for the 119th Congress include passing the Safer Banking Act, which would allow financial institutions to serve cannabis businesses, improving veterans' access to medical marijuana through the Veterans Equal Access Act, and enabling universities to conduct cannabis research under the Higher Education Marijuana Research Act. Titus emphasized the need for federal action to catch up with the state-level progress, citing Nevada's pioneering cannabis laws. Despite bipartisan support from lawmakers like Representatives Dave Joyce, Republican, Ohio, and Brian Mast, Republican, Florida, federal cannabis reforms face challenges in the Republican-controlled Congress. Titus remains determined, suggesting Congress may step in if federal rescheduling efforts falter. These points came from an article, Chris Roberts, MJ Biz Daily. The number of cultivation licenses decreased by 2 in December 2024 compared to November. In addition, the number of productions decreased by 1. One additional dispensary was added, which was the Rise dispensary in Carson City. The cultivations are taking the brunt of an impact of lower sales, heavy regulations, and overwhelming cultivation taxes, forcing many to walk from their licenses. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There is still a lot going on in California now that those devastating wildfires are getting controlled and people have started the process of cleaning up before they can rebuild. This week, our California correspondent Dina Nagib talked with Jackey Bryant from San Diego. Jackey has earned a great reputation in the industry with her writing skills and her development of the Cannabis newsletter, now a strategist with San Diego Magazine. And Dina talked with Jackey one-on-one.
I'm Dina Nagib, Principal Consultant of Grass Goddess Consulting and California correspondent for the weekly news show, Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is a special one-on-one interview, and I'm so happy to welcome Jackey Bryant, who is a friend of mine and also an amazing cannabis journalist who you probably know. She wrote the article in the New York Times on Thanksgiving a couple years ago. She's also here living in San Diego Pinto, a Southern California resident. She was the former managing editor of San Diego Magazine and now is a content strategist for them. She's on numerous podcasts, including Puff Puff Press. And she has her newsletter, Cannabis, which I'm a big fan of. I've been reading it for a number of years. And I'd love to start off, just talking about your last article that you sent out, Jackey. Well, first of all, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Thank you. I want to make a couple of notes. I'm also a former and hopefully future and sometimes pro-cannabis media commentator. I have been in the past, not for a couple of years now, but it's really good to be back. And I believe you also are a cannabis contributor, Dina. Don't forget that. So it's really good to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I am so honored that you sometimes run some of the stuff that I write. So I appreciate that. I really appreciated it over the weekend. We have all of these fires that are going on just north of us up in the Los Angeles area. And I really appreciated what you sent out, in your Cannabis newsletter. Do you want to talk a little bit about it, what you wrote and why?
Yeah, so my day job, I work at San Diego Magazine, and we mobilized at the magazine pretty quickly to get a list of resources for people either in the LA fires who need immediate on the ground help, or people in San Diego who want to help, seeing as, we're just a couple of 100 miles down the road. We consider ourselves, we're one mega region, we're neighbors, they're in our backyard, et cetera, et cetera. We also face exactly the same climate and fire threats that they do. So it hits close to home. We're not immune to these threats either, and we know that. So we mobilized at the magazine, and I always give the magazine its space to do its own work. I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but by the end of the week, after we had realized the full scale of these fires and how many hundreds of thousands of people had been displaced and were still under, I think it was like 180,000 people were still under evacuation orders by Saturday morning. I just woke up Saturday morning and realized that among the cannabis industry, I hadn't really seen too much communication, and I hadn't seen too much media going out about resources and where to help other than posts on social media, which are, of course, helpful, but it's hard to vet that. And I even noticed, people in the cannabis industry who had lost their homes posting information about FEMA and applying for FEMA assistance and saying that they hadn't known anything. And then it just kind of clicked for me. I realized that most so much of the cannabis industry is in LA right now. They're impacted, and cannabis media people as well. They're not going to be compiling resources and sending them out. And since I'm in the area, it feels close to home, and I have the ability. I realize no one's waiting to hear from the weed lady on a list of resources, but just in case they are, maybe this is the one email they get that's, delivering stuff to them. So I just whipped it up and I got a press release from FEMA, since, I am a member of the press, about how to make a claim and to do that immediately. And, I copied that in there. And if, the cannabis community also isn't always a community that taps into mainstream media. And so they may not be getting some of these communications directly. And I figured, what, why not? So let's send it out. And at the very least, people will know that they have this information in their inbox if they need to search for it.
The entirety of that interview is available on our PCMTV app and on the homepage of procannabismedia.com. In Colorado, the amount of sales of cannabis has turned into quite a bit of tax money for one of the oldest legal adult use states. In 2024 alone, Colorado collected $255 million off the sales of cannabis, just under $2 billion total in tax money since they went legal in 2014. Here's Xavier Jaillet in Colorado.
I'm Xavier Jaillet, chairman of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and a non-legal consultant with the McDonald Hopkins law firm. Here's what's going on in Colorado cannabis this week. The state, the Colorado Department of Revenue specifically, reported that the state made nearly $20 million in tax revenue from cannabis sales in December, bringing the total for 2024 up to $255 million. This increases the lifetime total of tax revenue generated from the program from 2014, when adult use sales started, through today to $2 billion, $873 million. Now, this is a remarkable feat and indication to other states that, yes, they should indeed pass some form of adult use legislation to generate tax revenue for the state, particularly in this day and age when states need all the help they can get developing infrastructure, helping with schooling and education, and then finally giving back to the cannabis community by providing social equity programs and grants to the less fortunate that do want to enter the space. I'm looking forward to seeing the continued revenue for Colorado from cannabis sales in 2025, and I think it's an indicator to other states that, now is the time. Join in instead of missing out on this revenue, particularly with states that are bordered by adult use cannabis jurisdictions that are losing valuable tax revenue as their residents and citizens travel across state borders to acquire their cannabis. That's it for this week. I'm Xavier Jaillet, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We have more, including our new correspondent in Illinois, the Clone Guy, plus an update on the race to become the 25th adult use state in America. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now, let me tell you my cannabis story. I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weejits filtration system. What? The Weejits.com, Weejits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. The guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weejits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind.
Welcome back to the C Block, or the final section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. It's not easy being in the cannabis industry. State regulations, rules, taxes, and the inability to do traditional banking are unfair and prejudicial. The 280E clause of the tax code cripples more companies and disallows cannabis businesses from writing off traditional business expenses that every other industry enjoys to operate. The federal government has used delaying tactics to stop any reform measures put forth by past administrations. And no one knows what the Republican control of Congress, led by incoming President Donald Trump, might do. Many of the existing and surviving cannabis companies are treading water while their debts continue to climb. And now billions of dollars of debt financing are coming due in 2026. And with no traditional ways to refinance that debt, the industry will have another challenge on their hands, no matter what happens at the federal level. On another note, the CEO of High Times, Adam Levin, will plead guilty of fraud at a U.S. court on Friday, January 17th in L.A. Levin paid an investment newsletter analyst for a favorable review without disclosing that the analyst was being compensated by High Times. He could face as much as 5 years in jail, but a plea deal might keep him out. This is the danger of taking a company in a high-risk venture public because every move you make is to be according to the SEC guidelines. But needless to say, the public world of cannabis is still pretty volatile. And after the DEA judge Mulrooney postponed the last scheduled hearings on rescheduling, this week was not a good one for cannabis stocks. Here's our man who is high on Wall Street, Doug Miller.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Leafly Holding shares will be delisted from the NASDAQ stock market on January 17th after the exchange's hearings panel determined the company didn't earn the required minimum $500,000 in net income from operations. It will now trade on the OTC Pink Open Market, and that's a big switch from the NASDAQ. And the marijuana rescheduling process is paused indefinitely after the judge canceled the hearing. DEA Chief Administrative Law Judge John Mulrooney II issued a ruling that included the cancellation of a hearing scheduled on January 21st. So let's see how the stock charts look for the ETF MSOS to get an idea of how this affects the cannabis sector. It's trading around $3.59 and it's at the bottom. It's curling up really nice, and a lot of the cannabis stocks are. I think we're seeing the market get excited for Trump, and I believe he will do something great for the cannabis industry. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. So what we have in Canada this week, two larger stories, is one, on January 29th, we are going to be holding, I say we as in Canada, Toronto, Ontario, is going to be holding a conference where they're going to be not only creating, but implementing a little bit more different strategies in order for the industry to become a little bit more profitable and be able to survive. This is something that is new, but at the same time, something that has and needs to be implemented in order for many of these new licensors and businesses to survive with the illicit market, which goes into my next story. The illicit market here in Ontario has overgrown, and the police services has announced that they no longer have funding to be able to securely bust these shops, individuals, and companies as a whole. I, for one, do find it unsatisfactory to know that they don't have funding to be able to fix what they've started. But at the same time, it's something that is completely understood because, frankly, we're going to need our cannabis. And unfortunately, the legal market isn't necessarily up to par to where many people that do consume and have consumed are able to obtain the cannabis that they actually do need. So it's a bittersweet, and I do hope we come with a better solution for them, not to cohesively be together and work together, but to work together and to be creating a better industry as a whole. This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
And with more breaking news this week, here's PCMTV founder Jimmy Young.
Thanks, Alaina. I'm PCMTV founder Jimmy Young, and this is the last weekend President Biden will be in office. He's been a pretty busy man. He pardoned 2,500 nonviolent cannabis offenders, and President Biden was trying to be the hero for the industry over the past few years. He was the first president I've ever heard use the word marijuana, but he never went far enough when it came to expungement or pardons, even though he did encourage state governors to free nonviolent cannabis offenders, and Maryland did a whole bunch, as did Massachusetts. And speaking of Massachusetts, the Bay State set a sales record in 2024, selling $1.64 billion of weed in the Bay State. Now, if they could only figure out how to do those social clubs that were supposed to be up and running, about 5 years ago. And now I'm going to introduce you, he said, to a new news correspondent for our Cannabis Coast to Coast news team. Her name is Kimmie Cannabis. That's right, that's her brand. And she comes from Oklahoma, a state with a long history of medical marijuana. You might remember that they voted it in 2018, and they were giving away licenses like candy on Halloween. Well, it's settled down a little bit, and Kimmie has been right in the middle of it. So here is the first Oklahoma Cannabis Report with Kimmie Cannabis.
Hello. I'm Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma's medical cannabis industry is bracing for potential big changes as lawmakers propose 22 new bills targeting regulations. One bill proposes increasing the required distance between dispensaries and schools. The big question remains, will already established businesses be forced to relocate, or will this apply only to new dispensaries? Another bill aims to restrict advertising methods, banning popular attention-grabbing inflatables like dancing tube men and flashy signs. Advocates argue these tools merely draw attention, not customers, to cannabis businesses, much like car dealerships use them to bring visibility. Perhaps the most controversial proposal is one that limits medical cannabis patients to purchasing just 2.5 ounces, or about 70 grams per week. This has sparked significant concern among patients who require high-dose care, particularly those in recovery from the opioid epidemic. For many, medical cannabis serves as a vital lifeline, helping manage chronic pain and other conditions without addictive pharmaceuticals. With all of these potential changes, the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority strongly encourages everyone stay engaged. Watch legislative sessions live on okhouse.gov and oksenate.gov. Stay informed. The legislative session resumes in February. Finally, a crucial deadline is approaching. The window to submit your OMMA required business credentials is still open, but closes on January 31st. Credentials are mandatory for anyone working in the medical cannabis industry here, so be sure to meet the requirements to stay compliant. Stay informed and proactive, Oklahoma. These changes could shape the future of the state's medical cannabis landscape. That will do it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for this week. I'm Kimmie Cannabis, reporting for the Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Now we will turn our attention to the Midwest. Indiana this week saw some movement towards a legislative change in the cannabis laws in that state. Democrat Rodney Pohl introduced legislation that would create an adult use market and continue to fund research into psilocybin. That is a Republican-controlled state legislature, so prospects for this bill to move forward are uncertain. But the new governor of Indiana, Mike Braun, is encouraging his Congress to move forward with reform, at least on the medical front. Most think he will not veto a bill if it reaches his desk. Right next to Indiana is Illinois, and that's where the Chicago clone guy operates. Here's Mark Allen's report from Illinois.
I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy. This is Bird, reporting from Illinois for the Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in. Illinois reported their 2024 cannabis numbers recently, and it was a whopping $2,007,400,000 worth of cannabis sales, and that's both for medical and recreational products. Pretty interesting numbers on there. Another side note is that the state said that the illicit market sold about $750 million worth of cannabis in the state, bringing the total sales to nearly $3 billion of cannabis sales in the state. Another side note, hemp sales for 2023 were $220 million. I'm still trying to find the numbers for 2024. Great news for the expanding Illinois medical marijuana program. They added 4 new ailments to the list that would qualify their patients to get the medical cannabis card, which will allow their patients to get discounted product. They now have a total of about 56 ailments that allow you to get that card. There's 4 more, like I said, but the most notable one that I was gonna, pass up on. I just couldn't resist. It's addressing an issue for mainly women. So women with female orgasmic disorder can now get their Illinois medical cannabis card. Yes, that is now approved for any women with the female orgasmic disorder, which I did not know what that was until just recently, which is about 5 minutes ago. But yes, 56 ailments, including FOD, are now included to get your cannabis card in Illinois. But thanks for tuning in. I'm Mark, the Chicago Clone Guy. This is Bird, tuning in for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One thing that is uniquely attributed to cannabis is its pungent smell. Many find it attractive, others find it disgusting, and that includes homeowners who end up adjacent to grow fields. Now, a couple in Michigan is suing every pro-cannabis regulator in Michigan, claiming undue harm to their children in addition to an odor they just don't like. Here's Amie Carter with more from Michigan.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters, bringing you this week's Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It's been an exciting year for Michigan's cannabis market. Adult use sales reached a record $3.27 billion in 2024, the first time surpassing the $3 billion mark. That's a 9.9% increase from last year, contributing to a total of over $10.2 billion since the market launched in December 2019. While some retailers celebrate the market is maturing, with the average prices for adult use flower dropping to an all-time low of $69.20 per ounce in December. Overall, dispensaries sold over 1.1 million pounds of cannabis in 2024, a 17% increase from the previous year. Interestingly enough, December's sales were slightly less than last year, with $264.7 million. Meanwhile, a West Michigan couple is suing over the smell of marijuana from a neighboring grow farm. James and Carrie Draper allege that the expansion of High Cloud LLC's outdoor grow operation is affecting their home life and impacting their children's health. They claim retaliation from local officials after their attempts to ban cannabis in the township and are seeking damages for their constitutional rights. As this case unfolds, it highlights the ongoing challenges in Michigan's cannabis landscape. I am Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's a disturbing story out of Washington state this week where a novice user of cannabis ended up in the emergency room after taking 40 milligrams of a liquid because he got misinformation from the bud tender at his dispensary. Instead of finding out what is an entry-level dose of THC, it's 2.5 milligrams, by the way, he took way too much and spent some time in the emergency. And this is why education, labeling, and teaching the mantra of starting low and going slow is so important.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the OLCC held their annual stakeholder listening session. Dozens of representatives from the cannabis industry met with Director Prinz, Commissioner Miletus, and key staff to discuss cannabis priorities for the upcoming year. A common theme was the desire for reasonable rules and enforcement with a focus on public health and safety. Also this week, sentences were handed down in a complex docudrama-worthy tale of kidnapping and robbery. A crew of 6 men drove from Texas to Oregon, and then, disguised as DEA agents with body armor and weapons, they restrained 5 adults, including a pregnant woman, with zip ties and duct tape. They were attempting to steal over 1,000 pounds of cannabis from the illicit market. These criminal activities reflect poorly on the regulated operators who are attempting to follow all the rules. And tonight, join us for the annual Blaze Ball, the opportunity for Oregon's cannabis industry to come together and celebrate. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
If your dream is to open a cannabis consumption social club, the time is now to get down to New Jersey because the application window is open. Atlantic City seems to be the place where some of these clubs will thrive. Here's Jill Goldsberry with more from the Garden State.
I'm Jill Goldsberry with the Garden State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and here's what's going on. New Jersey has a brand new gummy in town, okay? We have OGs has launched in New Jersey, and they are in approximately 90 stores now. 90 different dispensaries are carrying the OG's gummies, and you could find different versions. They are infused with live rosin, CBD, and THC. So there's something for everyone. And the brand is originally out of the Arizona market, and they launched here recently in New Jersey. In other news, we now have a Cannabis Chamber of Commerce that recently launched with an event in Central Jersey, which featured a panel of cannabis experts. Tahir Johnson of Simply Pure was on that panel, and Kieran Corentang was also on the panel, who is a cannabis investor. The mission of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce is to offer spaces for entrepreneurs and brand owners to get together for networking, for success, and also to advocate for green spaces in New Jersey. I am Jill Goldsberry with the Garden State Cannabis Report, and this has been Cannabis Coast to Coast News that you are watching.
And finally tonight, thanks to a cannabis data analyst firm out of Chicago called Hoodie Analytics, we have a ranking of the top celebrity brands of cannabis in sales revenue in 2024. Number 10 is Takal, the brand of Method Man. Number 9 is 93 Boys. Number 8 is 22 Red. That's Chavo Oda Jeans brand. Number 7 is Jim Belushi's Belushi Farms out of Oregon. Number 6 is Willie Nelson's Reserve Blend. Number 5 is Ice Cube's Caviar Gold brand. Number 4 is Cheech and Chong. Number 3 is Mike Tyson's brand. Number 2 is Garcia, handpicked, named after the late legendary guitarist from the Grateful Dead, Jerry. And the number 1 selling celebrity brand in cannabis, according to Hoodie Analytics, with $50 million sold, is Khalifa Kush. Cool. That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly. We'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Debbie Fazy with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCMTV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCMTV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.